Hi, everybody. Welcome to the class on archetypes, on conversations with archetypes, and how you understand how archetypes influence your life. That is a huge, huge subject. And so we have 6 weeks, 6 classes rather, to get to this subject. It probably would take 60, but we'll start with six. And this is a very exciting class for me because I feel when I'm into this subject that I am teaching at the center of the universe, the center of my universe. Because with the subject of archetypes, I can cover so much. Now, I've taught archetypes for many, many years now. And one of the things that I notice when people are picking out an archetype, for example, and we're going to get to how how you identify an archetypal pattern, but not today. Um, that people will, recognize, I'm this, or I'm a teacher, I'm a healer, or I'm a judge, or they can notice a pattern. But truly, the more important thing is to understand why it's so significant to excuse me, to understand, to recognize an archetypal pattern. It's it's not your personality. It's a much bigger part of your life in the universe. And so in our first session, I want to take you into the larger frame of of what's in the universe and what part archetypal patterns play within the universe so that you have an idea of why it's so significant to truly understand your archetypal patterns and what that means and how it is for you to to then recognize an archetypal pattern in another person and what how that changes your life to then think in terms of this person is I'm now engaging with a wounded child, and so I have to change my language. I have to change how I'm approaching this person. I now understand, or I'm dealing with an addict, or I'm dealing with a con artist, and how that then changes you. But even equally significant is when you actually get that you're dealing with a pattern. It positions you not to take that interaction personally. And so the first the first lesson here is that life is only about power. Now that is a huge thing for us to grapple with. But as we enter the cosmos, and archetypes are all about the nature of the cosmos. We start with a subject I teach all the time, which is the nature of power, and that life is only about power. And archetypes are patterns of power. But let's start with the whole principle. And this is like one of those jewels you can put in a pocket that you carry on the side of yourself, that you remind yourself of all the time. That everything you do in life, everything, the way you think, the way you dress, the way you, the car you buy, the words you choose, how you listen to the words other people use when they talk to you, you convert them into a power negotiation, conversations that disempower you, places that you feel disempowered in. People don't go to parties because I have nothing to wear. I'll be disempowered there. This type of thing. Everything is about power. And there's a reason for that. So life is, how many ways can we describe the purpose of life? Endless ways. But for me, after all these years of working with people as a medical intuitive and with my background in theology and religions and all of this, I now deeply believe that life is the journey and perhaps numerous journeys, numerous lifetimes of learning to take charge of the power that you have, that is your life, the power of, to put it in this language, the soul, within the sphere of creation that is the experience of the human life. The human life is only about acts of creation and living their consequence. And that may sound very maybe mechanical, uh, kind of dry, but actually, I think that's all there's to it in terms of what we're doing here. What we're doing here is we are experiencing creation. Now, what we've done is we've built mythologies around that. We've added on religious mythologies, spiritual God mythologies. We've done all kinds of, we've added on all kinds of stories to enhance this basic core truth that everything is about creation. And that's the nature of life. It is a creation experience. And so from the time we're born, we engage with the experience of learning about power. And we start with five sensory power, physical power. We start with the sensual level of power, what we can touch, what we can smell, what we can put into our mouths, what we can taste, what we can hear, physical power. And then we go into emotional power, psychological power. We go into the what we discover as we grow as baby human beings is that there are levels of power. And that's an operative word here, that there are levels of power. There's power that we can touch, and there's power that we can't touch. So there's power we can see, and there's power that we cannot see. And the power that we cannot see, we have to access with different sensory systems. So we can, what we do is we assign value to things that we can see, like imagine this was gold, and we would say, now that has a lot of power because it's gold, and we've assigned a lot of power to gold. But when we get to realms that we cannot see, it's a different kind of power. It's the kind of power we have to access through our inner sensory system, through our emotional intelligence, through our intellectual intelligence. And now we get to the major league. We go into our mystical intelligence, our psychic intelligence, our deeper, higher intellect. I really think of it as our cosmic intelligence. Now, life is evolution. And so what we do in our lives is we are continuing to evolve in ways that bring us to to realize that there are limitations to every level of thinking. Like in the physical world, if you just use your physical senses, you cannot, it is impossible with your physical senses to grapple with questions like, I wonder what the purpose of my life is. Your physical senses can't help you out. You can't see it. You can't hear the purpose. You can't taste it. You can't touch it. You can't smell it. So you cannot answer that significant question at the physical level. You have to say to yourself, this isn't working. I need more sophisticated senses. So you have to go into your inner self and start relying on a different configuration of senses to pursue questions, the answer to questions that have more cosmic value to them. And you're grappling because what you're asking for is you're asking to understand a different level of power about yourself, about yourself. You're saying, I want to understand my cosmic map. I'm not, the physical map is, where do I live? But the cosmic map is, why am I living? Why? So archetypes have to do with the invisible map and not the physical map. Power is the fundamental ingredient, then, of the human experience. And it's all about the management of power: physical, emotional, psychological, mental. It's the energy of the life force, it's the energy of nature, and it's the energy of the gods. It's the energy of gods. And human beings have always tried from the beginning of forever to identify the nature and potency of all this invisible power that is the substance of life. That's what human beings have done. And if you go back and you read history and you read the beginnings of even the most fundamental um, tribal lives, people were always trying to figure out their relationship to this world and that world, to the relationship to how power in this world organizes itself. It is that very question that gave rise to the mythological stories. Well, there must be gods up there. That's it. There must be gods up there. And those gods regulate weather, and they regulate catastrophes. And what can we do here on earth that can calm the gods down so that they don't send floods and they don't send catastrophes? And how do we work with this? And from this, from these great questions of what is our place in the universe, how does that power relate to our power? Uh, and you look at the stories, you go back, and you see that all the early stories of myths have the gods with all the power and human beings with no power, which makes sense, really. It makes a lot of sense because people died easily. They didn't have any medicine. They were helpless. They only had the power of myth, and they only had the power of their belief, but they didn't know science. They didn't have anything that gave them this sense that, you know what, I'm not sure there is a God. I can just go to a doctor. I'm not sure there's anything, right? So they they instead looked upon the universe as this huge field of force, of which they were just a small part, just a small part. Nature was so much more powerful. They had very little. Look at how powerful the animals were. They didn't have these weapons where they could just shoot them. I mean, everything had so much power compared to the human being. So you could see how they would come up with stories that position them and gods that position them. But this is so fascinating to me that especially if you look at the Abrahamic religions, as they evolved, as people evolved, and here's another word: evolution. Everything is always evolving, and we'll get to the present moment shortly, but everything is always evolving. And so as these mythologies evolved, the gods went from way up there, Mars and Jupiter in the west, and Hermes, and all the gods that populated Greek and Roman mythology, to eventually the gods began. Remember, they projected that they looked somewhat like us. They did. Their statuary and their temples made the gods somewhat like us. But eventually stories of half god, half man appeared, Hercules. So what they were doing was they were incarnating the power up there, closer and closer into physical form. They were incarnating that power. They were incarnating it. And they were incarnating. And what and that's very important to understand, that this system of power was something that human beings were just drawing to themselves because they wanted to understand the intelligence of power, how it worked, and what, even at that early stage, especially at that early stage, was that so many of these early people understood that the universe was regulated by law, by law, by law and order, that it was, in fact, as capricious as it looked. It wasn't capricious at all. It was actually very orderly. And Pythagoras, for example, identified mathematics and the laws of math and the laws of music and the musical scale. And in fact, he even said that the planets had and the galaxies had sound to it. He was a traveler. And so he'd come back and he said, all the galaxies and the planets, they have notes. You can hear them, the music of the spheres. Who knows who Pythagoras was? But he said it's orderly. It's not chaotic, it's orderly. But in order to see that order, you had to get out of the chaos of your individual life. So from the ground, it's very chaotic. But as you rise and get to a more higher altitude, your personal chaos takes a back seat to the necessary chaos that really brings order to the universe. I'm going to say that again because it's really important. And that's that as you, it's not, let's put it in ground level. Think about that. Let's say you get a job promotion, and it requires that you have to bring the chaos to your family of uprooting everybody, pulling the kids out of their social circles, pulling them out of the schools they're in, separating them from their friendships, all the chaos at the ground level. But you looking at it from a higher point of view with a longer range in mind, realize that if I take this other job and I know what say you were moving to Maine or wherever, and you know that with that additional income, it would make putting them into college so much easier. This would be easier, that would be easier. That it is a type of chaos that will bring a greater order in the long run to them. And so that personal chaos is eclipsed by the greater order that will be the outcome. So this is what I'm going to emphasize as we get to what is the point of accessing archetypal patterns. Archetypal patterns bring order to personal chaos. They are a way of accessing a way of understanding patterns of power that unfold in your life, even though at the personal level, the experience is you go through periods of chaos, you go through turmoil. That's life itself. That's life itself. And there are archetypal journeys that everyone's going to go through, and that's what we'll talk about in session 2, that are just naturally chaotic, but they bring order at a larger level into our consciousness. And so people like Pythagoras, we have Pythagoras ordering mathematics, saying this universe is law. It is all about law. And then you have the order of, for example, how I think of the 10 Commandments. Again, laws that were brought in that said if you want to organize a society, it has to have law because we are by nature creatures of law. And so there are certain laws that are actually in us by nature. That civilize us, that allow us to be civil together, like honoring parents, not stealing. Now, think about what the 10 Commandments do. They honoring a marriage couple, that not lying. There are certain fundamental laws that organize a civilization, no matter where you are. It's universal. They came through the Jewish tradition. And what they did was they solidified the organization of human conscience, that this is what makes our conscience work. The archetype of conscience, that that which we know better than to steal, we know better than to cheat, we know better than to lie. The 10 Commandments really became the archetypal fodder that made up conscience within human beings. And in a sense, you don't even have to be taught those. We are born knowing them. They simply woke him up. Again, because why? We are creatures of law. And what are patterns? Patterns organize power because we need power to be organized according to why? Because the universe is all about law. It's all about law, the laws of creation, the laws of science, the laws of nature. And that's the nature of God. The nature of God is law. There is no off planet God that looks like us staring down, doing it's not. That's part of the mythologies that we've created as a way of personalizing the universe. So, one of the things we go through is we want to personalize the universe, but it's not personal. There's nothing personal about it. And that as you move into archetypal consciousness, as you move into the impersonal world, as you move into the impersonal nature of God, of the divine, you realize that this is a very impersonal universe that is completely governed by law, the laws of creation, and that we are here to participate in the laws of creation, and that archetypal patterns are built into the inherent system of creation as a way of helping us govern the power that is inherently in us. That is, and, and that they're like governing forces, governing computer patterns during our lifetime. During our lifetime. Now, we've always, you know, uh, I think it's interesting. One of the archetypal patterns that we have is that we've always looked for meaning and purpose. It's one of the things that is part of the higher altitude, because your senses can't bring you that. Your senses can't help. Your five senses physically can't uh, provide you with any data on how to find. You look around a room and think, what's meaning and purpose? How do I? And what you realize is, I am the one who gives meaning and purpose to what I do. It isn't out there, it's in here. You start discovering a mechanism in yourself that you think, wait, I'm the generator of meaning and purpose. I'm the one it's not out there, it's in here. That that shift is part of the great transition from ordinary consciousness to the beginning of mystical consciousness. When you realize, wait a minute here, I got power all wrong. Power is not out there coming toward me. Power is in here going toward there. I'm the one who assigns power. I'm the one who gives things meaning and purpose. It doesn't have any meaning and purpose until I assign it, until I give it. I'm the one. And that is a profound, great transition. We're going to hold on to that because when we get to understanding the journey of life and where archetypes fit in, the role of our patterns, the part of the core role is to constantly get us to experience choice and consequence, to expand our consciousness so that we actually start choosing, making choices from the position of how of not being motivated by thinking power outside is coming toward me, but how can I empower this moment? Or how can I act or choose or think in a way that doesn't disempower me? That's all life is about. That's all life is about. Now, evolution implies progression toward something. Progression towards something. And life is this constant flow of evolution, constant. And I think that we've talked about, I mean, I've talked about, I don't know what you talk about, but I've talked about this business of becoming conscious. And you know what drives me crazy is that after a while, you hear yourself say that and you think, I've got to have another word for this. I mean, I'm so tired. I'm exhausted with my own vocabulary because it falls upon deaf ears. Like, what does that mean? What does it mean? What does that mean? I, and what is the way to explain what it means to become a more conscious person? Conscious of what, right? Conscious of what? Of gaining a greater and greater understanding of the purpose of life. And what does that mean? What the heck does that mean? Well, it's like realizing here's a difference of how many times someone will ask, I wonder what the purpose of my life is. Now, the word my is a big deal here. Just two little letters, the word my. But if you took my out and you thought, you know what? Life's not about me. I wonder what would happen if I started to just say, what's the purpose of life? And how do I fit into the greater scheme of life? What if I humbled up and just said, what is the purpose of life? And how do I cooperate with the greater purpose of life? How do I become conscious of this power and how best to use it in every situation? And that is the beginning of becoming very conscious of what you're really doing here, which is, I'm going to start using the power that I have. And a- and in truly shining my light upon others, I'm going to start using power and following laws, inner laws, in a way that I've never paid attention to. So I'm going to hit a pause button here and I'm going to just jump into this a little bit more to make so that you could relate to this. Um, in I spent a lot of years as a medical intuitive. I'm sure many of you know that. And it took me, into stages of identifying illness and then into long years of working and healing, and it was the greatest education of my life. I wouldn't be teaching this if I didn't do that. It was that that eventually led me into archetypes. So it was through doing readings on you that I really began to understand. Excuse me for 1 minute. I is thank you. Um, the nature of power, because I went from thinking that I was just kind of trying to figure out what kind of illness or what illness someone had, to eventually um, trying to figure out how to help them, because I noticed, I just assumed everybody wanted to be healthy, to then realizing that being healthy or whole was in fact very frightening to people. And that came as a bit of a shock for me. It really did. I thought, what why wouldn't someone do everything they possibly could? And that led me to write the book Why People Don't Heal, and to identify this syndrome called woundology. But that was just really the beginning of my study of power. Because I didn't have a knowledge of archetypes then. It was just woundology and how people used wounds, how people used wounds to maneuver in a street currency. And I can't go out tonight. I'm sick. There's nothing wrong, but I'm going to just say I'm sick. Or how they use wounds to punish other people, and and just the whole psychic field of it. But what I learned was that it was universal, aka archetypal, that it was a stage people go through and some stay in. And it was a stage people go through because becoming empowered is so terrifying. But why is that? Why is that? Another way to say it is becoming conscious is terrifying. Why is that? Well, another way to say that is that what conscious is all about is a relationship with your capacity to see the truth, to recognize truth, and the speed at which you recognize truth, the speed of it, the speed at which you identify what's real. What Buddha would say, what's an illusion and what's truth. So, what conscious is about is becoming conscious of what's really going on. Now, and it and what that means, and this is such a big, huge, great, big, huge thing. And now I realize that I wish we were in a classroom together, because I'd be jumping on stage and drawing something. And what I would want to draw is an illustration of how that every time you recognize a truth, every time, like every time you think, I wonder how I really feel. And then one day you say, I'll tell you how I really feel. But you tell yourself first, I really feel this way. And you finally identify a deeper truth in yourself. You finally identify something. Maybe, let's put it in archetypal language. Maybe you identify that you are an addict. Maybe you finally identify that you're addicted to gambling, or you're addicted to a substance, or you're an alcoholic, or you're an addict, right? You finally identify, articulate, language a truth. The moment you language a truth, the moment, the second, the instant, all the world that you had that was built on the illusion that you weren't an addict evaporates that fast, that fast. You can't hold it together. It evaporates that fast. It's gone. That's how powerful you are. That's how powerful we are. That's how powerful our inner world is. Our inner world holds everything on the outer world together. And we're born knowing that. We're born knowing that. We absolutely are born knowing that. So we spend all this time, we spend most of our time, most of our energy holding on to our illusions so we can hold together a world full of illusions. Because that's how we expend our power. We invest our power in things that aren't true, and we let those non-truths go gradually, gradually, slowly, slowly, gradually, because we can't. The speed of truth is the speed of light, and it goes like that. So it changes a situation from this to this in a second, like Buddha says, in the blink of an eye, in the blink of an eye. So what consciousness is, we grow in our capacity to deal with the speed of truth. That's what it is. That's what conscious is all about, the speed of truth. And that's why when how many times you hear when you want to say something to someone, when you want to say something that's truthful to them, and they don't want to hear it, they get hysterical. They'll start screaming, "You don't understand. You don't know what you what am I? It's not my fault. Why is it my fault?" They'll start screaming like that at you. They'll do anything to block a truth from coming in. Because the moment it does, the moment they become conscious, there's a shift in that archetypal pattern. And instantaneously, the world that was held together by that illusion, by that power, is disempowered immediately. And you have to deal with the world that was just revealed to you. That's the law. That's how the laws work. And this to me is what's so exciting about what we're studying. Because when you finally get to a level where you say, I'm not interested in the physical. I want to know how the laws of creation work. I want to know how the mystical laws work. I want to know how my archetypal patterns work. Because if I can work with my patterns, I can work with the core of my power. Instead of like instead of like if you're an artist, a starving artist, if you have the starving artist archetype, instead of actually starving and berating yourself for not trying and telling yourself that that following your art just doesn't pay off and all the myths of the starving artist, you finally realize, oh my god, I have these stories in my head about all these starving artists who have to suffer for success and they're not famous till they're dead and da 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 da. And I realize I've just consumed all those stories, and I need to separate myself from those stories in the blink of an eye and just go for it. Just go for the artist in me. And I'm going to starve the stories and not the artist. I'm going to starve the stories. I'm going to starve that voice, but I'm not going to starve the artist. I'm going to go for my art. That's how you empower yourself. That's how you do it. You work with the laws of the universe and the power of your archetype. You work at the level of creation. Becoming conscious takes a person from one level of understanding of something to another. But the core of what you're understanding always comes down to power. And it's power in a situation, power in a relationship. And this is where power in an organization, they're all governed by archetypes and how something works, power with other people, religions, the power of God, the power of their God, our God, other beliefs and opinions. just remember, and this is universal, every single thing is a power negotiation. Even when you're shopping, next time, and when you're, what do you call that? Looking through a rack and you look at the dresses or you look at the shirts or blouses or whatever, and you think, I don't know if I like this now. What you're actually saying is, I don't know if I will feel empowered when I wear this. Use the right language. Use the right language. See it for what it is. Use the right language. You know, even Plato recognized, by the way, that the gods were archetypes. Even Plato, he's the first one I know that used the word archetypes. Even Plato said, we've taken the power of this universe and we've given it names and power over us because we want somehow or other to identify this incredible system of power and put it in units. And so those units were gods. So we said, but there's obviously a power that creates anger. And at the big level, it's Mars, and it creates war. But it does. The Mars in you goes to war with people. I don't know anyone who hasn't gone to war with somebody. Venus, the power that needs love. We, all of these powers, the nature of God is expressed as law, it's felt as love, and we speak of it as light. And from quantum particles to mystical light. But that is what God is. God is expressed in law, and it's felt as love. What we call love is what God is, our human capacity to have a tactile feel for the nature of God. And I emphasize this because love is so powerful that's why we're so selfish about it. That's why we know that love is the emotion. It's not even, it's bigger than an emotion, but love is the force that we regulate so carefully, so judiciously, so we monitor it. So I don't know if that person's worthy of love. I don't know. I don't know. I'll turn it off. Watch people shrivel when you turn off love. Watch yourself shrivel. Look at the madness. Look at how people can't even get out of bed when love is cut off. And look at how people rise from the dead when love is returned. Because love is life force. It is the life force. It is God saying, this is the force of God in us. It's not, it is the force of life that is God. And what life is all about is us directing that. And what's monitored by the universe is what our motivation is for that, to withhold it, to share it, to use it. And our archetypal patterns are the containers that help us in a lifetime regulate this power, organize it, because there's just too much power. There's just too much. So we're kind of assigned these patterns. We're under contract with these patterns. They're sacred. They're sacred contracts. But we develop ourselves. We go through our shadow and our light, our challenges and our darkness and our light through the patterns that we're assigned to. This is a completely impersonal universe, but what is personal about this universe, what makes it intimate, is prayer. And we're not going to talk about that today. We'll get to that in our last class. But what makes it intimate is prayer. That, as impersonal as it is, because it is all law and order, is, and I find it so incredibly outrageous, is that there's no secrets. There's every thought matters. And I can't figure it out. I can't figure out the mathematics of the intimate human mathematics, like how every human life is really so significant. How can that be? But it is. It is. I don't get it, but it is. That every which is why every human being is so filled with these the same desires to discover themselves, to know themselves, to want to do something, to want to be seen, to want to the more I learned about how extraordinary every human being is, the more I learn about that, the more I truly am in anguish when I see the deaths of people like in Ukraine or the Russian soldiers, or people die meaninglessly, or people suffering from anxiety and depression. And I think to myself, if you only knew that you could get out of this, that if you only knew the grace that you could access, if you only knew, if you only knew. Anyway, and I emphasize this because this moment we're living in is such an extraordinary time. This is not an ordinary time. Really, I don't think it is. I think, and it's worth talking about this for a moment because it supports the reason I would be teaching a class like this, um, and teaching you about yourself and why it's so important for you to understand your power as deeply as you can, especially when it comes to co creation, especially when it comes to a subject that is at its core about your empowerment, about changing you so that you do not ever again feel a moment of disempowerment. Um, and I think, looking back at history, there are so many other times when someone could have said, boy, the world is in the end of times and chaos. Whether we look at the plague in Europe or you look at World War II was no picnic, but during all of those times, there were other things in the world that remained incredibly stable, including the environment was stable. I assure you, it never occurred to anybody in the 1400s, 1300s, 1200s, 1800s that they would ever have climate change on their mind, that they would ever think, oh, there's a countdown to when climate change can't be reversed, um, where species were dying at a rate like they are now, where um, we would have where they had weapons of mass destruction, where human beings would actually, actually consider dropping bombs to settle disputes that would render this planet useless for a couple 100,000 years so far as producing water and food. And there you go. And they would think, good, now we've won. Now we finally won. What kind of species is that stupid? But it has brought us to a break of, and here's the word, evolution, where I think that one of the dynamics happening behind in the invisible world, in the holy world, so to speak, in my language, is that our evolution has been accelerated. And we can see that acceleration taking place in the technical world. We can see this acceleration taking place in any number of ways in the external world, but the external world's a reflection of our internal world. And there is an acceleration taking place because we are at a place where every species, every form of life, from aquatic to air every country, every single everything is facing catastrophe if we do not get that we are the engines of creation, that it's up to us to make a choice to shift our consciousness into a species incapable of using the weapons we've created, of realizing that it's up to us to go from there's not enough to the thought form that we can create plenty, that we can go from being people of the fossil era to people of the solar, that we can become a different species. We are on the brink of entering the galactic age, an age of incredibly different, perhaps, companionship. Who knows? Who knows? But it is up to us to shift our consciousness and expand our understanding of the nature of God, to understand that a God that is a bio spiritual, ecological force that spans galaxies instead of an earth based one that looks like us. That we need to transition into people who only relate to people that we like and get to a place of cosmic intelligence where we realize we're all in this together and my consciousness is connected to yours. And therefore, my consciousness is connected to the whole of nature because that's how cosmic law works. What is in one is in the whole. What is in the whole is in one. And so we have to start using and living those laws. And that's what archetypal truth is about. It's about getting to a place where you identify you archetypally reason, not so you can say to someone, I'm a queen and I just don't take orders. But you get your archetypal, you think like you recognize that human beings evolve through archetypal stages. Recognize where you are. Recognize that when here's a perfect example at a ground level. I was in Spain years ago with my dear friend Norm Shuey, and we were staying in this small village, and I came upon this dog. Dog was starving, just bones, starving. And my immediate response was, what the hell is wrong with these people that they walk by this starving animal? They don't have any compassion, nothing. I was in a very poor village. And I was just yelling at Norm, what's wrong with these people? They're terrible people. I was on my high horse about this. And as we walked into this very little hotel we were staying in, and I emphasize little because that's why someone heard me. So this woman comes up to me and she said, people can't afford to love their dogs here because they may have to eat them. Huh? Bam. Now, that story really stuck to my ribs. Big, huge, because I take everything and put it in the archetypal basket. And what that story told me was that we love in those stages. Our capacity to open our hearts goes according to our capacity to what we might have to do. So we can't afford to project that our dogs are our children and dress them up and do all these cute little things with them. if in fact we would have to rely upon them to survive like we did farm animals. And realizing that gave me such a different compassion. I felt shame for myself. Once again, judging. Once again, judging. So it is an archetypal stage we go through. And from that point on, I'm telling you the truth. I hold back and think I don't know what stage I'm at that way or what stage other people are at. But I realize even as a nation acquires democracy, for example, or acquires commercial abundance, having gone through not having it, like, for example, the freedom America has had to have anything it wants as long as it can get it, right? And then you have third world countries that have not, and they are just now acquiring that abundance. And now comes all of these cutbacks because of fuel and all of this stuff. And then someone very sharp and perceptive said, they're going to have to go through that stage of feeling, of going through the entitlement stage that formed America. You can't deny them that because that is the first stage. And there it was, the archetypal stage. So we'll talk about that next, but this is where, next session, this is where understanding archetypes gives you a lens through which to understand humanity. It's really more than just about yourself. It's about everybody. It's about everybody. An expression of the orderly nature of the universe is that everything is patterned. Everything is patterned. I think this is one of the most extraordinary things, but everything is patterned. Everything is archetypal pattern. Leaves are patterned. Trees are patterned. Fish have patterns. Animals. Everything has patterns, and behavior has patterns. You have patterns. Every single thing in the universe. And patterns organize power. Patterns in the leaves of a tree organize the veins. It's everything has patterns. So everything about you has patterns. And look at how we are. We cannot exist outside of our patterns. We cannot. It's not possible. No, it is not. It is not possible. So start there. You are totally governed by your patterns. And a way of interacting and recognizing that, for me, one of the ways of appreciating the nature of God is recognizing that the divine has patterns and you're living in them. And the divine is law. And the reason that to me is such a rich mystical revelation is that by understanding that the nature of God is law, you learn the laws and you rely upon the laws. You rely upon the laws. It takes superstition out of your thinking, but it also gives you, like, for example, the phoenix rising from the ashes. It's a myth, but it's a law. It's death and rebirth. It's the cycle of death and rebirth, which means that with every death, whether it's the death of an idea or the death of something in your heart, rebirth is going to happen. Some form of rebirth is going to happen. That it is guaranteed. It is a promise. It is an archetypal promise. It is a guarantee because that's how the system, that's the promise of the universe. That's the nature of God. That with every cycle of release, there's a cycle of birth. And that's just how the system's set up. It doesn't matter who you are. And that's the reason why, when you understand that it's impersonal, and that's the story of the prodigal son. Where the one son takes care of his father, the other son goes away. And then the father welcomes back the son who with open arms who's come back. And the other one says, how can you love him so much? He abandoned you, and here I've been along. It's not personal. It's not personal. It just is the way love is. Love just welcomes everyone back. That's the way love is. And for you, for every human being, and here's archetypal again, for every human being, that journey from getting out of your personal self to your impersonal is the toughest journey you're ever going to go through. To put it in the language of Jesus, it is your crucifixion. It is literally the toughest thing you'll ever go through, is getting out of thinking that everything's about you, everything's for you, everything should be for you, and then getting to your archetypal patterns. And the reason I'm going to emphasize this is because in identifying an archetypal pattern, when you see the universe through personally, which is where we all start, then you pick the archetypes you want instead of the ones you are. Then instead of the ones you are. But I did one of my workshops. This was years ago. There are 4 archetypes everybody has. We'll get to that later. You know, the child and the prostitute and the victim and the saboteur. But then there's 8 that really comprise you intimately as an individual. So in my workshop in Sacred Contracts, that's what it's about. It's about picking and identifying your archetypes and really seeing their work in your life. Anyway, this one woman comes up to me privately. She said, "May I talk to you?" I said, "Sure." And she said, "I just wanted to. I really I didn't want to do that, but I'm I'm a kleptomaniac." And you know what? Honest to God, as soon as she said that, I held my purse. I mean, I just grabbed my. I said, "Really?" And but anyway, so I went up to her later. I wanted to see her archetypal chart. I wanted to see if she picked the thief, and she didn't. And she didn't. She didn't identify that at all. And so I thought, well, that's very interesting because she picked the ones she wanted, not the ones that really reflect her struggles, who she is, what she really works at. So it's fascinating to me. Fascinating. You can't get out of your archetype. You just can't. You can't escape them. Archetype, it is within the archetypal patterns that you learn the laws. And in fact, even down to, you know, from laws go down a level. Then there's rules, then there's habits. Um, all of these lesser categories are still reflections of the same thing. And that's that we are creatures of law. We can't get away from it. We have our habits, we have our rules, we have our regulations. And you know, you don't tell people I have laws in the morning. You say I have habits in the morning. I have habits. I have habits in the morning. I need coffee and I want my newspapers. I need the news. I'm a news addict in one arm and I'm coffee in the other. And I don't like to be disturbed. I cannot stand to be disrupted when I am reading the news or watching the news and drinking my coffee, and then I come alive. This isn't a law, but it's a habit. But the habit organizes. Why do we have habits? Why do we have rules? Because we want to organize our power. That too is archetypal. And the rules and the laws that you have, as you'll see when we move down the road here, completely reflect your archetypal patterns. Completely. Athletes do athletic things, and they have athletic rules and regulations. Absolutely, they do. I have the habits of a writer. I like it quiet. I like it I like to be alone. I like my own space because I don't like anyone disrupting creativity. It drives me crazy. Okay. But my patterns completely reflect my archetypal patterns, as do yours. As do yours. As does everybody else's. I mean, we live in our patterns. We live in our patterns. Okay, so patterns are the nature of the universe, and patterns organize organize the lives of ants and bees, and everything is patterns because God is pattern. And that's and if you get that, if you get that, you could sit in your yard and just, honest to God, marvel at the nature of the universe, at the nature of the divine that is in everything. The fact that you can count on the tide coming in and out, that we can count on the consistent orbits of everything, that you can count on everything. And really that's the first place that you get to when someone says they don't believe in anything greater, and I think you don't get it. You don't get it. You, it, you are so held together by order, by consistency, by if you only knew how to work with the laws, you would see that you're breathing easier. You realize you're not alone. Okay, I'm looking at now. I just wanted to talk about archetypes in general, but I think I've already been carrying on. And I'm looking at this about what now these are things that everyone goes through, and that's I said purpose of life. Now, here's another archetypal thing that every person I've ever met goes through, and it doesn't matter what language or what word you're going to put it in. It is an archetypal pattern, and it's the relationship you have to the cosmos, to God, to the force that's out there, whatever you want to call it. But that itself is an archetypal dynamic in that you will question it and you will wonder about it. And you will wonder if you can bargain. You will. You will wonder if you can bargain. And you will have a superstition. You'll have some kind of superstition. You don't want to talk about this, something you don't want to talk about. So you don't want God to overhear you. I love this. People in my workshops, I'll ask them questions about what do you have faith in? And they won't answer the question. They won't answer that question. What do you have faith in? I don't know. And it's easier for people to tell me what they don't have faith in. Why? And this is archetypal because if they actually answer it, they think God will then hold them accountable. And and that's because we are born knowing that we're being listened to. We're born knowing it. We are born knowing that this is a very intimate universe. And not only is it intimate, but we're born knowing that our role here, our role is to become conscious of that and to stop being afraid of becoming empowered, to stop being afraid of recognizing that this is a very intimate, impersonal universe, that in fact we are being watched and that our choices do matter. Um, Let me see. Now, the reason, another way to discuss why it's so important that we work toward becoming conscious is that archetypal patterns, and all of you are familiar with Carl Jung, you know who he is. And of course, he spoke about the collective unconscious, this incredibly powerful force in which our consciousness dwells, the collective unconscious, what we all know, where we all It comes out of our collective unconscious. Um, I think that we have this internet now, that the internet was actually created as a reflection of our internet being animated, because we really have we've in entering the nuclear age, I really do think the rules of life shifted to the laws of life. I think to the laws of creation. I think about the story of um, I think about the story of who is it, Krishna and Arjuna. And Arjuna didn't know Krishna was a god, and he was his chariot driver. They ride to the edge of a huge field. There's on the eve of a battle. And on the eve of the battle, Krishna says to Arjuna, everybody that I care about is on the other side of that field. And if I go to war with them, I'll kill them. And it'll be horrible karma for me. And if I don't, if I run away, it'll be horrible dharma for me. I don't know what to do. And Arjuna, the god says, embraces him and says, what difference does it make? You have to follow what you're ordered to do. And they'll have other lives. Everything is ordered. Everything is taken care of. Krishna says, I fear the fabric of the universe is about to be torn. And I think in some ways, this describes the moment where we're at, where I think the fabric of our universe is getting torn. But I think what's on the other side of that fabric is a way of understanding our power that is, in a sense, incomprehensible. That where we're going is a way of comprehending what human nature is really capable of if it got beyond focusing all of its attention on itself and connecting to the community of human nature, the community of others, of realizing how much we could do if we cared about the whole as much as we care about ourselves. I think that's the great transformation. And I do really believe that as you shift into archetypal consciousness, as you look to understand the greater patterns of the universe, the greatest application you can make in of that knowledge is, how do I apply this to understanding what's happening in the world and in my world and in the world of others? How do I best understand that? And so you start with really recognizing that a pattern is a given body of behaviors, and that so long as you are unconscious, as Jung would describe it, patterns will make choices for you until you're conscious enough to make the choice yourself. And that's really what they're all about. Again, it's about the laws of creation, about choice and consequence, about you experiencing the consequences of your choices. You know, someone will say, I don't want to make a choice. I don't, that is a choice. And you've allowed the pattern to make the choice for you. You've allowed fear to make the choice for you. And therefore, you'll experience what a fearful choice creates. And you'll always be disappointed. And again, until one day you decide, you know what, I don't, I'm going to make a choice and I'll just live with the consequences. And and you find that the more the more you make a conscious choice, the more you're able to maneuver the choice, the more you're able to work with it, the more you're able to make the next choice and the next choice. And then you realize this is what it is to be conscious of my choices. And then you realize more and more that the more conscious you become of your choices, the more you start to include others in what's the consequence of this choice that I want to make upon the lives of others. So you start expanding your understanding that, you know what, every choice I make influences the lives of others. So it goes from being completely unconscious to becoming conscious that every choice you have is in fact involved, has influence on the lives of others, in the lives of others. I think when you look at, I mean, I truly am amazed when I look at this world and I look at the people that are in leadership positions. I won't comment on 90% of them, but they're appalling. They're appalling human beings to be in positions of leadership. Is this the best humanity can do? Is it, I mean, Putin, I mean, is this the best, Erdogan? Is this the best humanity has to offer? Is this the best we have to offer? Is this it? And Kim Jong Un, I mean, and yet it's a reflection of collectively our not realizing that collectively, if we held ourselves together instead of seeing other human beings as threatening, we'd make very different choices. We'd make very different choices. They couldn't sustain themselves. It's like when the Berlin Wall came down, and it came down in a second because the world stopped believing it had to be up there. It came down when the world empowered. It was empowered in a different way. When the thought of it coming down was more empowered than the thought that held it up. We see examples of this all the time, but somehow we are not getting what the what it is to unite our power together. We're still so afraid of our power alone. But I think what this time we're in is the beginning, just the beginning of our being able to understand that power. We're just at the beginning of it. But it is such a profound thing. Now, I want to close this session by just saying that all archetypes are neutral. Like there's no such thing as this is a better archetype than that, and this is good. They're all just neutral patterns, like cookie patterns. I mean, you may like a Christmas tree pattern better than a circle, better than a square, but they're just patterns. They're all patterns. And within that pattern is the whole spectrum from shadow to light in every one of them. So whatever pattern we're dealing with, like the starving artist, and you hear that and you go, oh, no, 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 no. I mean, the light in there can starve the starving part of the pattern. And everything is about bringing a person into consciousness that they can command the pattern and the pattern not them. But as long as a pattern is unconscious in you, you will behave according to the stories that are familiar to you about the pattern, about, think about the princess. Think about all which is such a familiar stories and all the storybook stuff on the princess and all the storybook stuff on the princess and the knight and yada, yada, yada. Think about that. And how many people, the little girls, dress up as princesses. And in fact, I saw that today. I saw yesterday at dinner this little girl. She was in some kind of recital at the end of school year, and there they had her dressed up in a princess and a little princess crown or whatever that is. And I'm sure her father says, "Your daddy's little princess," and the whole 9 yards, and feeding that archetypal pattern. Now, whether or not she has that pattern is another story, but from the get-go, the stories of the princess are put in her head, and so automatically the knights put in her head, and so these stories, we all have these stories put in our heads, all kinds of stories. Boys read warrior stories or hero stories, or girls read, maybe girls today, they read them both. But all the stories we read, um, that go in our heads as children, and all the stories we see around us as kids and all the things we hear, it all gets mixed up into things that we start to believe, and all the stuff you see on TV, ideas get put into your head. I mean, I did an archetype. I do, archetypes once a week just for fun. And I did the magical child quite a while ago. But the the magical child, I mean, think about how the magical child archetype, was animated in us in these generations, but especially the generations of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, because of television. Because of television, there weren't a lot of magical children images in fairy stories. There were, kids who were lost in the woods, and kids who were kidnapped, and kids who were, put in cages with witches, and Hansel and Gretel. And there were orphan stories of, but when we were kids in the 50s and the 60s, etc., they introduced Walt Disney and the magical child and Mary Poppins and all these stories of perfect families and on American television, like My Three Sons and Donna Reed and Bewitched and all these kinds of fun stories that idealized a magical childhood, and that woke up an archetypal pattern along with its next of kin, the wounded child. And these two archetypes really became the major child archetypes that of a generation. And the magical child and the wounded child, the wounded child said, that should have been my childhood. I should have had a magical child. And that certainly has stuck with a lot of people who grew up during those decades with those two patterns locked in, right? And and when you're unconscious, they don't get that you were so influenced by TV growing up. Then, or you don't get that you were influenced by books or like that, then you can actually think certain things are real. That in fact your life should be, and this is where you think, my life should have had this, or I should have had a knight. I married this guy because I thought he was my knight in shining armor. Or I married this woman because I thought she was a princess. And that's what it's like to be unconscious and not realize that what's motivating me is my pattern, and I've got to get hold of that. It's really quite something to reach a place with yourself when you recognize an archetypal pattern at work within you, and you think, when I think of when I have a when my child archetype gets activated, I actually will say, I can't do anything serious today because I'm I can't put two and two together. I can feel it. I'm having one of those days where I feel like I need the kind of stuff that's not serious, and I just don't talk to me today. I need to goof off today. I can feel it. And if you put any demands on me, it's not going to go well until I get that. And all that part of me needs is just enough attention to be able to say, just give me some time to do what I want for a little bit, and then I'll be just fine. But there was a time when I would act it out, when I would act it out, and I would have a temper tantrum because that's what my child did. I don't do that anymore. They you outgrow it, and now you get a place where you say, you know what, give me a couple hours and I'll be right back with you. And you do what that archetypal pattern in you requires, but you don't take anyone down. This is what it means to kind of become more and more conscious. And you don't bite anybody because you're having a bad day. You'll learn how to work with your pattern. So we'll get to all that. We'll get to all that. Finally, I want to say this too. You can't have a pattern that's not yours no matter what. You can't. You have the patterns that you have, and that's it. It's like, what's that other expression? You have to play the hand you're dealt. And so, as much as I would love a goddess archetype, I don't have one. And so there you go. There you go. And I think I have a touch of Athena, but I don't, there it is. So we have to deal with the hand that we are dealt. And but here's the joy in that. When you realize the hand you're dealt is really a full house, and it's marvelous to know thyself. What is one of the greatest archetypal, holy, mystical truths? Know thyself, and you know your universe. You know the universe. Heaven doesn't make mistakes. It doesn't make mistakes. That's one of its great mystical truths. You there's a perfection in you, and you see it. The higher you go, the more you see it. Thank you, everybody.